We're recording. Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us for the Using Canva webinar. One of my favorite programs to use is Canva. I'm Christopher Garcia. I'm the Business Development Specialist at the SBDC at UNM Valencia Campus Workforce Training Center. And we created this webinar to give you better insights on how to use a no or low cost tool to better create marketing and promotional materials. It's a pretty great tool. I'm going to go through my slideshows and then I'll dive into using it. My phone number is on the screen as well as my email. If you want to set up a meeting to go over this further, you're welcome to email or call me, and I'm happy to walk you through creating a design. I just noticed right before I opened my presentation that the slides are numbered at the bottom, but I think I kept copying slide number 8, so there's a lot of slide number 8s. So if you want to revisit a slide, we'll work on that at the end of the presentation. Before we begin, let's go over some webinar ground rules. Everybody on the call right now is muted, so don't worry about background noise. Only I have to worry about background noise, and sometimes you could hear the wind in the background. If you have a question, please put your question into the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. And just to make sure the Q&A feature is working, can everybody on the call right now Q&A me a hi, hello, how are you? And I put on the slide, each slide is numbered, but I don't think it'd do much good to put the slide number in the Q&A since most of my slides are number 8. Well, good morning, hello. Hi there. Hi. Hi again. Hello. And hello. Thank you guys. I think you are pretty savvy in Zoom. I don't have any problems today. Shirley, I see you said hi in the chat. If you could put your questions into the Q&A, because I'm able to create a report from that. If I don't get to all the questions today, I could email you. Very good, Shirley. Thank you. So everybody seems to be pretty savvy with the Q&A. If there's something going on, like you can't see me or hear me, or I'm on the wrong slide, you could chat that over, and I'll be able to correct that. And there's also a feature to raise your hand. And in fact, everybody on the call right now, can you raise your hand if you could see my slides and you could hear me okay? Perfect. Very good. And if that's how you get my attention in case something's going terribly wrong. Maybe I'm not advancing, maybe I'm frozen. You could raise your hand for me and I'll know something's going wrong. Perfect. You guys are very good Zoomers. So here's a graphic of our center locations throughout New Mexico. And the mission of the SBDC is to build skilled entrepreneurs and strong businesses by offering no-cost confidential business consulting and lower no-cost training events like this one. And I'm going to tell you more about the SBDC in the next few slides. And then we'll get into an agenda for today's webinar, and then we'll go through some slides and then get into Canva. This slide includes 3 topics for upcoming trainings: QuickBooks Online, that's going to happen in June. We often have a cybersecurity training and basic steps to starting a business in New Mexico, which is one of my favorites since I'm the one that does that webinar. And since you all signed up for this webinar, you probably know how to sign up for our other webinars. You go to our website and you could register for any webinar through our workshops page. Here's the agenda for today's training. I'm going to tell you more about the SBDC, answer the question, give the slideshow about Canva, get into the using of Canva, a recap, and then do a Q&A. So let's talk more about the services of the SBDC. We offer 2 major services, again, confidential business consulting and lower no-cost business trainings. There are no limits to how much no-cost counseling you can receive or trainings you can attend. And we have centers throughout New Mexico, so there'll be one close to you. And if you look at the graphic in the upper right-hand corner, it shows what we do: renew, grow, launch and start up small businesses. This slide shows what we expect from our clients. My fellow business advisors want you to succeed, so you'll be assigned homework or further research. So please do the work necessary to succeed. We can't make decisions for you or offer tax or legal advice, but we can connect you with the information you need to make educated decisions. But part of making an educated decision is working with licensed professionals like attorneys and accountants. I would just want to remind you that everybody on the call right now should have received a webinar survey. In fact, everybody who received a pre-webinar survey, please raise your hand. Oh, it's not looking good, you all. Okay, please check your spam or your junk box if you didn't receive one of those pre-webinar surveys. You'll also receive a post, like a webinar evaluation. Okay, good, very good. Thank you. And please make sure to do your post-webinar evaluation. And remember, sometimes those go into your spam or your junk boxes, so just keep a lookout for those. You might not receive it today or tomorrow, but it will come to you within a week. Okay, the paperwork stuff is out of the way. If you have any more questions about our program, what we do, you put those into the Q&A for me. And before we jump into using Canva, let's find out more about what Canva is. Canva's mission states from their website, launched in 2013, Canva is an online design and publishing tool with a mission to empower everyone in the world to design anything and publish anywhere. Business Insider describes Canva as a free graphic design platform that allows you to easily create invitations, business cards, flyers, lesson plans, Zoom backgrounds, and more using professionally designed templates. I like to call Canva graphic design for dummies, because that's really what it is. It's the easiest program I've ever used to create graphics for things like social media posts. And Canva offers templates for numerous documents like business cards, social media posts, flyers, brochures, resumes. The resumes are one of my favorite features in Canva. Posters, presentations, and many other types of marketing materials. I'm glad you joined me today so I could introduce you to this versatile tool. And I put an article at the bottom, two little links at the bottom of the page. One is an article for Canva from Business Insider, and it tells you a little bit more about Canva, gives you some cool little video snapshots. And then Canva actually has a design school. I'm going to give you a broad overview of what you could do in Canva and how it might help you as a small business owner. But you could take the free lessons, they're free at the Canva Design School, and they go in depth into how to create different documents on their website. So that's pretty neat. And I will send these slides to you after the presentation. So don't worry about getting the links down, because I'll send these straight to you. I might even chat it over to you when we get into using Canva. Still, before we jump into Canva, I have to tell you about creating a marketing plan, or I wouldn't be a good business advisor. Creating a marketing plan is not difficult, and it'll help you in all aspects of promoting your business. I laid out the basics on the slide. Step 1, identify your target market or markets. Think about your product or service offerings. Come up with a reasonable price and profitable price. Decide how to distribute your products or services, and think of promotional methods that appeal to your target market. Then create and track promotional goals. The best marketing webinar around is located at the SBA.gov website, and it's called Marketing 101. Who would have thought? This webinar series takes about 45 minutes to complete and has 2 of the best handouts for putting your marketing plan together. And I want to show those to you now. So I included that link to SBA's Marketing 101. And my computer rarely lets me share from my slides. So let me open up my browser window. And would you raise your hand for me if you could see, if you're seeing Canva website right now? Okay, perfect. Thank you all. So let's go to the SBA.gov website. And this is a good way for you to see all the other learning tools available on their website. Under Learning Platform, they have two platforms, Learning Center and Ascent for Women. All the women on the call right now and men, if you want to take the Ascent program, it's a great program. It's open to all genders. It's mainly focused on female entrepreneurs. And you paid for it with your tax dollars. It's one of the best programs around. Take advantage of it. The Learning Center, the regular Learning Center is great. I visited this Learning Center many times. I've taken the business planning webinar and the marketing one, and it's the best I've ever seen, really, for free. And here's Marketing 101. In fact, since I couldn't open that link on the slide, I'm just going to chat this over to everybody on the call right now. And here are the different videos that talk about identifying your target market, creating a marketing plan. But if you don't want to go through those videos, if you do anything, if you take anything away about planning your marketing activities, it's to go into their worksheets like I did at the bottom of the screen. And then they have the Marketing 101 checklist, which will really help you get your ideas together for what types of marketing materials do I really need to create? Who am I going to give these marketing materials to? What are they like? What are their likes? What are their demographics? Where do they live? And where am I going to distribute these things? It's a great little checklist that puts all your ideas into one place. And then they have the Marketing 101, a guide to winning customers. And this is all you really need to do for a marketing plan. It's a fill in the blank. It goes over the marketing plan like I laid it out on the slides. Identify your target market or markets, product, price, place, promotion, and create goals and track them. And if you do nothing else, just fill out this sheet once a year and make sure you're on track for your target market and make sure you're tracking your marketing goals and you know exactly how and why you are doing your marketing activities. So that's a little bit of a marketing plan in a nutshell. I'm going to go through the next few slides. Excuse me. There we go. I'm going to go through the next few slides. There's only about 3. And they're going to give you a little background before we get into Canva and give you a little insights into using Canva. And then we'll go into Canva, create an account, edit a template, and then create a document from scratch. So when you're creating your Canva account, it's pretty simple. And I'll demonstrate using our sbdc@gmail.com address. The 3 tips on the slide are best practices for creating an account. Number 1 might sound silly, but my clients often use email addresses they can't access or forget about. So use an email address that you remember. Creating a strong password is important for cybersecurity reasons. And you may want to keep some of these documents private. So make sure you're using a password with uppercase, lowercase, letters, numbers, and symbols. And it has to be a minimum of 8 characters. And if you're working with other business people, you want to use an email that's professional. You don't want to, some of my clients come in with emails that are pretty silly. And if you're wanting, you have the ability to invite people to work on a design with you. And if you're going to use this, I don't know, maybe you're managing a social media account for somebody and you want to share the design to be worked on by your client, you want to use a professional email. And you could create one on Gmail, Outlook, MSN, or you could create one based on your own website domain. And if you have questions about that, you just put them in the Q&A and I'll be happy to answer them. So those are the best practices for creating an account. And before jumping into a template or design, it's best to choose colors that represent your brand, because you want to be consistent in your colors and fonts. And this includes colors for backgrounds, words, outlines, etc. When doing so, you have a few options and I'll explain those to you. I want to show you the 2 links on the screen. But no matter what colors you pick, be consistent in all your designs and pick colors that resonate with your target market or markets and products or services. If I were a funeral parlor, I wouldn't pick neon colors for my designs. Conversely, if I design whimsical greeting cards for a living, I probably wouldn't pick a monotone color scheme. So Canva uses hex, H-E-X color codes to create colors. And canva.com/colors. Let me see if it opens on my slides. Of course, it doesn't want to open on my slides. So we're going to go to canva.com/colors. And this is a tool from Canva that allows you to select colors for your design or select colors for the branding of your business. So they have a color palette generator, and you could upload an image. And I have an image for Canva. We'll upload my picture, and it selects random parts of the picture and creates a color palette for you. That's actually a pretty color palette. I kind of like it. I wasn't expecting such a nice color palette from my photograph. So you have that option. So if you have a logo you wanted to upload to create a color palette off of, you're able to do that. And these codes at the bottom, so tussock is the name of the color, but the code to create the color in Canva is C7814B. And you could just do a printout of this so you know that those are your colors every time you create a design. Let's go back. There's some color palette ideas from Canva at canva.com/color, and they give you color palettes. Sometimes you want to type in maybe a keyword like business, fishy business, that's funny. And it will give you a color scheme based on an image that they've already picked. That's kind of a beautiful color scheme right there. And you could type in keywords, or you could type in pink. And then you could see already created color schemes that you might want to use. If you're a real rebel, or you're real specific about your colors, you could use the color wheel, and you could move the dot to create colors, and it gives you the color you want on the left and the exact opposite on the right. So that's good for creating like borders. So if I wanted a blue background with that greenish yellow border, and it gives you the codes, and it gives you a little bit of color theory, color combinations. And then this is a cool part of Canva, is it gives you the color meanings and symbolisms. So I was reading the one for black yesterday. And alongside white, black is one of the first recorded colors used in art. The pigment created by Paleolithic who use charcoal, burn bones, or various fish minerals. It gives you a little bit about what it represents. I think that's a pretty cool little feature from Canva. So let's go back to our slides. The second link on is for Adobe, the Adobe products, and that one opened from the slide. But what Adobe does is they allow you to do the same things as that Canva option does. If you wanted to select a file, you could upload, and it creates a color scheme based on a photograph. What I like about Adobe's version is you could move around the bubbles to find an exact color you want. So say if I wanted to go with the brown of my collar, I'm able to do that instead of the purple of my shirt. And I think that's pretty cool. And then you could change it from muted to bright to deep. And it just gives you a little bit more versatility. And then they have the color wheel as well. So if you wanted to move your colors around, you're able to do that. But those are just two options for choosing some colors for your branding. And now I want to talk to you about fonts. So Canva has their own fonts. A lot of us are used to using maybe Word, Microsoft Publisher, maybe an Adobe program. And Marcos, that's a funny question. Yeah, you probably could type hemp on the color palette. but Canva has their own fonts. The fonts and other fonts can be purchased or imported. If you got a pro account, you could often introduce new fonts or pick out custom fonts. But I just want to remind you, pick fonts that resonate with your target market and represent your brand, and try to limit your use of fonts to 3 fonts at most. So that's just my advice on that. And then when choosing a template, you should be consistent with your branding. And Canva has tons of templates to choose from, but it's important to be consistent with your branding and choose fonts and colors that resonate with your target market or markets. The fonts and colors should be easy to read, represent your business, and look good across all marketing or business materials. When choosing a template, know that almost everything in that template can be edited, and don't be afraid to experiment. Finally, some templates have a crown next to them, meaning that you have to get a paid Canva account to use them. And some templates will have a $sign under them, and that means that they have a graphic within them that has a cost associated with it. Most templates are free or very low cost. And I want to remind you, Canva is a for-profit business, and they make money by offering extended features. And they also sell stock images and other graphics. And they have a printing service. But I want to let you know, you could download any of the designs you make on Canva and have them printed wherever you want to have them printed. So just keep that in mind. And then I'll go over the last few slides after we get into Canva. Let me hit escape. There we go. So here's what Canva looks like when you go to www.canva.com. And we're going to sign up today. Sign up in the upper right-hand corner. So you could sign up if you could continue with Apple, you could continue with Google. So if you already have a Google account, you could just sign in with that account. You could continue with Facebook if you wanted to. I like to continue with an email address. So we're going to use SBDC Los Lunas at gmail.com. It's going to ask me my name, and it's going to ask me to make a password. And I have to write this down because I have to delete this account for the next time I do this class. On 4/12/2022, and hopefully I'll run into an issue, so you know that you're not the only people who run into issues when creating these Canva accounts. And I'm going to make a strong password. Let's see. I only use 7 characters, so I'm going to add 1 to the end. And it gives me this feedback. It's a medium password. A word by itself is easy to guess, and I did use a word in it. I don't feel like going into a strong password, so we're just going to get started anyway. It's going to say, we sent a code to sbdclosunas@gmail.com. Within the next 10 minutes, I have to enter that code. So in my other window, I'm going to go to check my email. And indeed, I did get an email from Canva with a code. Sometimes it could go into your junk or spam folder, so make sure you look there too. I'm going to enter that code. And Canva lets me in. And it asks me what I'll be doing with Canva. What are you using this for your personal reasons, student, nonprofit, charity, small business? And most of you are small business owners, so just select small business. I could create a team if I wanted to. That means I could invite other people to work with me on different projects, but I don't want to do that at this time. So I'm going to select maybe later. And which plan works for you. Often if you create a team, you have to get the Canva Pro. So the free version, let's see, it gives you 500,000 plus free templates, 100 plus design types, free photos and graphics, and 5 gigabytes of cloud storage. And the Pro gives you 610,000 premium templates, premium photos and videos. Those are the photos and videos with that little crown next to them. Premium features and unlimited project folders. I think for most people on the call right now, a free account would work just fine. If you decide you need a pro account, you're welcome to purchase one. So let's start for free. It gives us a little confetti there. And now we're able to create, let's see. Before I get into that, Elizabeth, you asked, where's the color palette generator again? It's at www.canva.com/colors. So let me type that answer in. And let me send that to you. And this is a good time. So before we get into a template, let's just look at some color palette ideas. It's Easter time, so let's use this nice little pastel color palette. I think that'd be pretty. And it gives us our color code. So if this were my business, these are the colors that I would be using consistently to represent my business. Let's go back to Canva. Let me show you around a little bit. So here's for you. This is Play with Canva. It gives you some videos, gives you some of the more popular types of documents you might want to create, like an Instagram post, create a poster, create a logo, create a Facebook post, create a flyer. It gives you some ideas to learn and play. There's a weekly challenge that's kind of fun to create an image for a particular topic. The basics of Canva, trending elements, and graphic design basics. And then down here where it says recent designs, if you created any designs in the past, they are saved automatically to your Canva account and they appear down here. And then we could go back up to the top of the screen. You see home, templates. And if you wanted to select a template, they have templates in all of these different areas. Features, photos, icons, print products, but I'll go into that a little bit more when we get into making a design. Here's their learning guide, Canva 101, great course, some tutorials, and then some pricing if you wanted to go into paid accounts. Let's see, presentation, social media. These are the quick links to get to different things. And then if you had a custom size that you wanted to create, so say you're using Google My Business. And you wanted to post an image for your Google My Business profile. I just Google what is the, the recommended Google My Business post image size is 480 by 270, and that's pixels. 480 by 270. And that refers to the size of the image you want to create. You could create a custom size and you could put 480 by 270. And you could create that new design. So that's the ideal size for a Google My Business post image. Since I want to go over working with a template first, they have a lot of prefab templates and you could see them under templates at the top. And let me make sure I have the recording going. Yeah, I do. Okay. You could go to templates at the top, and if you wanted to explore the different prefab templates they have for, say, Facebook posts, you can, and they're all down here. Remember, I told you there's the ones with the $sign, they're the paid ones. The ones with the crown, you need a pro account for. And the ones without anything at the bottom, you're welcome to use for free. And even if you select one that's paid, you could always customize this template and see where there's crosshatch marks on the back, that's the paid element in this design. So if I could always get rid of that, and then I think the rest of this is free if it lets me download. It surely does. So even if you wanted, you found a template you like that's a paid template, you could always go into it and get out the paid features. So let's go into social media. Facebook post again. We'll do a Facebook post. And then when you choose that, if you look at the left-hand corner, it says for you, piece Facebook post, and then it goes into all the different types of templates available to you. You could also start creating a blank template. So let's just look for a template we might want to create. Oh, look, there's one with the Easter bunny here. And it's a pro template, so it doesn't want to let me use that one. Let's see what else they have in the Easter category. Perfect. So say I want to put this on my business Facebook page just to wish everybody a happy Easter. I'm able to do that. And say I want to edit the template. So let's see. Maybe I don't like this colorful background. Maybe I want a different type of background. Maybe I want a solid colored background. I could change the background by going up there and say I want to do a custom colored background. I could hit this plus sign right here. And then let's go to our pastel color palette with all the codes that we selected to represent our business. And maybe I want that nice mint color in the background. And that's B4 F8C8. And the Canva opens a lot of windows, so sometimes I get lost in all my Canva windows that are open. You're free to close some, and then you could always look and make sure you always go back to the window that you're editing in. So here's the plus sign. I could enter my specific color code. B4F8C8. Oh, that's a pretty color, that mint. I could also decide, maybe I'm not 100% on that color. I could move that dot around and change that color. And then I could always, move this slider around and select a color that I like here. But let's enter that B4F8C8. And that's the color I want to go with today. Before I start designing too much, I want to name this template. So when I download this file to my computer, it's already named. That's one of the nicest features about this. I want to name this Easter Facebook post and then maybe today's date. I like to stay away from using those slashes because often files don't like to save on the computer that way. So when I put in the date, I like to go 2022, start with the year, then the month, and then the day. That's how I like to enter the dates. And it's if you're looking for something on the computer, then maybe the most recent item, it tends to sort better that way. And everything as I'm working is saving automatically. It's saving to the cloud. And as long as you see that check mark, everything has been saved. If you're using a desktop computer, you could also do Control-S, and that will save as you go. So that we created we have our template here with the background I like. Maybe if I was doing not a Facebook post, maybe I'm doing a Facebook post, I want to add another page to this. I could also delete that. I could copy something that's already been created. Delete. You could add pages at the top, or you could duplicate the page at the top. I don't want to do any of that today because I'm just making a Facebook posting. You can't resize unless you go pro, and you could see that up here. And then if you're wanting to go into the file here, you could see the different things you could do. You could show ruler guides if you wanted to. I don't like to use the ruler guides. I'm not that precise when I do design. You could show margins. I like to show margins because most of the time when you're creating one of these posts, what's in the margins right there won't show up totally in a preview. You could show print bleed if you wanted to, so it bleed all the way into those dotted lines. Since this isn't a document for print, I'm not going to use the print bleed. And remember, these dotted lines won't print or show up in your design. They're just guides for you. You could save all changes this way if you wanted to. You could save this to a folder, and I'll show you that when we're done. You could see comments. So if you're working with somebody else on this project, you could see what the comments are. Like, maybe I don't like that background color. You could see different versions if you have a pro account. So right now we're stuck with one version. You could make a copy of this design and edit a copy. I often do that when I'm making the images for these webinars. I don't need to change anything but the title. So that's often what I do, is make a copy. You could open in the desktop app. Canva has different apps associated with it. I like to use it online. I don't like to download the desktop app. It's my preference. And then you could download in a few different ways, and I'll show you that when we're done. So now let's see, we could edit this bunny. We could move it using this button at the bottom. We could move it a little bit. You could do Control Z on your keyboard if you didn't mean to move it. That takes you back to where it was before. I could flip this horizontally or vertically. I don't know why I would want to do that with this image. That's kind of cute, the bunny upside down. Okay, I could crop the bunny. So maybe I only wanted half a bunny. I just did Control Z to put it back to the way it was. I could edit the image. That means I could, maybe apply an effect to it, like a trippy effect. This is called trippy. I don't want to do any of that today. And then you could search for effects. I don't want any effects on my bunny today. And then I could change the color. And remember, we picked certain colors that represent our brand. So let me go back to that color combination. And maybe I want to do one pink bunny, one blue bunny, and one yellow bunny. So let me write down the pink. I could also copy and paste this, but I'm going to write them down just in case I want to use them again. And it's kind of nice to copy and paste. Like if you look at that Tiffany blue color, it's AO. Is that the letter O or is that the number 0? I don't know. I might have to copy and paste that one. And then we have FBE7C6 for our yellow bunny. So let's go here. Let's start with the pink bunny. Then we'll have our blue bunny. And that, I think, is a 0. Not a letter O. E7, E5. There's our Tiffany blue. And then let's do our yellow, which is FBE7C6. And then maybe we want to make the Happy Easter. That peak, it actually saves the document colors for us, which makes it easy for us to keep to choose a color that we've already used. Perfect. Make sure everything's saved and it looks good. You could also go back, undo. That's Control Z on your keyboard, and they have the quick buttons up here for that. I mentioned to you earlier that you could share this design to work with somebody else on it. This is how you do it. You press the plus sign next to where it says, my name's Chris Garcia, so it puts a CG up there for me. And I could change the settings on this. Only people added can have access, or anyone with a link. If I was going to share it with more than 5 people, I'd probably want to do anyone with a link. But if I just had a small team, I usually probably only want to share something with 1 or 2 people. I could invite somebody to a team if I wanted to invite them to work on everything with me. I don't want to do that with this in this case, so I'm just going to invite for this particular document. I could ask them, I could allow them to edit, I could allow them to comment on it, or just to view it. And that's kind of nice. If you don't want to hear any comments or have any edits, you could just have somebody view it. But I'm going to allow my other email to edit it. And it asks me again, do I want to invite them to my team? No, I don't. And it says my design is shared. I'm going to show you what the invite looks like if I get it. Wait a few seconds here. And it went into my clutter email box. And this is what it looks like. And if I were to put a picture of myself in my account, it would show up there. But it invites me, Chris Garcia would like you to take a look at the design title, Easter Facebook Post 2021. And then I could open in Canva. I already have an account with this email address. If I was somebody new, I would have to create an account in Canva. Okay, so that's inviting somebody to it. This is some insights. It's not really pertinent to a design. If you wanted to share it to Facebook, you could do it directly from Canva. If you link your accounts to this Canva, I don't want to do that today. I don't think that's a good idea for most people on the call. In my case, I want to download, so I could download it from the share area, or I could download it from file, and I tend to like to download it from the file area. And I mentioned to you that you could download it in different types of files. It recommends PNG, that's a high quality image. If I was going to post this on Facebook or to another social media, that's probably what I'd like to use. JPEG is a smaller image file. It's okay for a website. If I wanted to post this to a website, that would be a good file for me to use. These days, we have a lot of storage online, so it doesn't really matter. But you have the option for JPEG. If I wanted, maybe I was going to use this as a card, an Easter card. I could download it as a standard PDF or a PDF print, which is a high quality print. If I wanted to have this printed up and take it to a printer, I would most likely want to do it in PDF print or PNG. If I added a video feature, and there's elements that you can add that allow movement or video to be added to these images, I could download it as an MP4 or a GIF. And if I was going to do an MP4, that would probably be for, I don't know, maybe if I was going to do this on Facebook, or if I was going to add this to maybe my YouTube channel. If I was going to add this to my website, I would want to use a GIF. So today, let's download it as a PNG. And it opens up in Paint on my computer. It will open up maybe on different types of programs on your own computer. I want to go File, Save As. And I probably want to save this to my desktop. And you see it uses the name that you named it in Canva to save to your desktop. I love that feature. So save, and it says any transparency will be lost. Yes, I want to continue anyway. And then if I go to my desktop, you could see it saved to my desktop, and I could open it up in Paint. If I wanted to go to Facebook now, let me see if I could go to my Facebook in my other window. Can't go to my Facebook today, but I could always upload that from my desktop to Facebook. Let's go back to Canva. So that is editing a template. So now let's go back home. I could close these extra windows. And let's say I want to make a template from scratch. Maybe I want to create a Facebook post from scratch. I could put in a size. So this size happens to be 940 by 788. Maybe I have my own online store and I'm using a program like Shopify. They might have a certain image size in pixels or in inches that I might want to use. So let's create a custom size. 940, 788. Again, I title my design. It still lets me pick a template if I want to use a template, but I could always create from scratch. And to begin, you click on that white space, and then in the upper left corner, right here by the amount of time I've been editing, it will allow me to choose a background color. Let's use that beautiful yellow. I could upload my own images to Canva. So let me upload media, and you go to the left-hand side of the screen and you go to uploads. So, and you could record yourself if you wanted to. I like to create my own videos and then upload them. You have that option. I could also drag media into that dotted box so I could upload it, but I'm going to upload from my computer. And I have that image of me already on my desktop, so I'm going to use that. And I intentionally put this on a white background with some space so I could show you how to crop. So maybe I want to edit the image. I could do that here. I could adjust brightness, contrast, saturation. I could put a filter on myself. I could auto enhance. Let's see what that does. Put a little bit more color in my skin there. And then I could flip the image if I wanted to. I don't want to in this case. But let's go back to the edit image. And then the crop came back up for me. I want to get rid of that white space, so I'm going to crop it. Maybe I want to crop the top a little bit too. I could resize my picture. I could change the angle. There's also this tab called Elements, and there's lines and shapes. I'll put in a line just so you can see what a line looks like. There's some graphics. And you could see all of them. You could also search for something in particular if you wanted to. There's stickers with animations on them. You could put in photos. They have their stock photos. And again, there's the ones with the crown that are pro for a paid account. And then they have the ones with the dollar signs or cash that you have to pay for. They have videos you can insert. They have audio. They have charts you could insert. If I was making a graph or maybe I wanted to put a table in, I could do that. And they have grids and frames. Some of my favorite things are the frames. And maybe I wanted to make my picture look a little bit pizzazzy. I could choose a frame. Nah, I don't like that frame. Maybe I want this frame. I could put my picture into a nice little frame there. If you look at the upper right-hand corner, it shows you what color that frame is, and it shows a color randomly now. But I could always pick my own color. Maybe I want to use that pastel blue. So I could come here, add a color. That blue happens to be A0E7E5. And I could change to that pastel blue. Let me get rid of that arrow, and I could click something and press delete on my keyboard, and that would get rid of it. Frames, let's go to lines and shapes. I'm not too keen on that sunshine. Let's see what I could find in the shapes. I could change, I've added that shape there. I could delete that shape. I could go back and undo what I just did. And you see that cloud will have the check mark when it's saved. Maybe I'm not keen on that color. I could change the color of that shape that I added. Now I want to add text to that. And they have some font combinations that are cool if maybe you have an online shop, you're doing a greeting card, making a poster. They have some pretty cool special font combos here. Or you could go ahead and add a heading, a subheading, or some body of the text. So I want to do some body text because that box is kind of small. Resize that box using the buttons and making sure the arrow shows over it. And then I could pick a font. So you see this is called Open Sans Light. And if you open up the fonts, you could drop down the menu. They have different types of fonts. I like that bold font for what I'm doing today, but there's the Crown, that's for a pro account, but there's a lot of free fonts, tons of free fonts. They don't always match up with the fonts we're used to, but I'm sure you'll find one that works for you. Put some text in that box right there. And then I want to go back to elements. I could type in something that I want to find, like Easter. And it brings up all the pictures available for me to use. The ones without a $ or a crown are free. Let's find a cool one for Easter. The ones with motion will show up with motion if you save them as a GIF or a MP4. I like that blue bunny. The dotted lines show up to tell me when I'm aligned with something. That design's coming along. Maybe the bunny's telling me Happy Easter. I could highlight the text if I wanted to, and I could change the color of that text. Maybe I want to do it in like a deep blue. that design. Oh, I like these little peeps too. One of my favorite types of candies. I could put some peeps up there, kind of blending in with that yellow peep. I could also crop a picture that I've added. Maybe I want to crop that yellow peep out. If I click on something, I could do Control-C on my keyboard and Control-V on my keyboard, and that's copy and paste. If I wanted to grab two things together to maybe move at one time, I could press Shift and then click on the items together, and it gives me position or group. And group lets you group things together so you can move them all at one time. Position, so say I wanted to send, maybe I wanted to put these here, but I wanted to send them to the back of the shape. I could do that backwards. I don't want to do this in that case. And that's me creating an item from scratch. I could share it. I can't resize, but I see in the cloud that it's saved. I could also do Control S to make sure it's saved. Animate, if I wanted to put in some sort of animation, like maybe, yeah, you could see if you hover over them, it shows you, but I'd have to save that as a GIF. So I would just do a file. I would do a download, probably as a PNG to post to my Facebook page. And then I could open it in Paint, as the program it uses to open this PNGs for me on my computer. I could do a save as, and I could save it to my desktop. It saves under the name I created it in Canva. Transparency will be lost. I can't create anything transparent anyway in Canva unless I had a pro account. If I wanted to print this out, maybe I wanted to send this as a greeting card, I could download it as a PDF print, and I could send it to the printer. I could copy this design. I mentioned that earlier, so maybe I want to make a copy of this design. Somebody I know liked it so much, maybe I could just take my picture out, and maybe I'm going to upload somebody else's picture into it. Who knows? I could edit it that way. I could change the name of this new design. But it changes automatically, copy of Chris image. I told you I was going to show you how to save this to a file. So file, a folder, save to a folder. Yeah, I could create a new folder, maybe Chris personal, if I was using this as, or maybe Facebook posts. And then when I go home, it's automatically saved for me, remember. I'm going to go home. And if you look down here, you could see your recent designs. And then you could see this is my personal folder. And it's not really letting me use my folders right. I think there's a glitch with the program right now. But normally your folders appear down here in the recent designs. Under your projects, actually. Click your projects right there under home. And it will show you your different projects and folders. Folders is a tab right here. And there's Facebook posts. There's uploads for items I've uploaded. If I star it, I'm saying that's one of my favorite things and get there quickly with that. And then I could purchase, so down here, if I purchased any graphics in the past or any images, any videos, they would show up there. And again, that's home, your projects. If somebody shared a design with you, it would be under shared with you. If you want to throw something in the trash, you're welcome to. You could create a team. And then these are pro features I won't talk to you about right now. And I almost went the whole time of the class. Let me go into that Q&A and see if I have any questions. So a question from Claire is, what kind of template would you recommend for email marketing, or would it be better to create it using the blank option? So if you go to templates right here, Claire, they have the different types of social media posts. And you could go to see all. And these happen to be icons, but if we go home, templates, social media, We could go to Instagram post, Facebook post, Facebook covers, Instagram stories, LinkedIn banners. I've used that. I've used the Facebook, I've used the Instagram, YouTube channel art. If you're using something like a program that's not normally used, you could always go on to their help section and you could create a custom size if you need to, like Google My Business is one that a great marketing thing I recommend everybody go to, and that's google.com/business. But I just Google My Business post image size, and I usually find something in a help article or in Google support.google. And support.google says, I'm trying to find photo size. It's giving me a Q&A, and it gives you, different people will tell you what size of image you should use. And you could create a custom image that way. So Claire, I hope that answered your question. I see some stuff in the chat. Marco says, can we use our own custom images in the templates? Yes, you can. Let me go back here. And if you go into a design, let's go into one we already did. That's uploads here. And if we wanted to put my picture in there, we're able to upload that and use my custom image. Is .svg the normal format I need for embroidery? SVG, I don't know if that's an option there. Let's see. That's actually a pro feature, but if that is a feature you need for embroidery, it's available to you in a pro account. You could also create a PNG or an image, and then maybe you could convert that using a converter if that SVG is not available to you. I went over just a bit with you guys. I'm happy to stay on for a while and answer any questions. I hope you like my design on the fly, the Easter Bunny talking to me. And right now, since we have time, or I have time, I'll open it up for chat for you guys. Everybody who needs to leave, you're welcome to leave. But if you want to speak, you could raise your hand and I'll allow you to speak and ask a question. A lot of thank yous in the chat. Well, thank you guys. Thanks for letting me share a cool tool with you. Let's see. So Claire says, thanks. So it seems I could use any of those social media options to create an image. Yes, you can use any of them to create an image. If I want the text to match, I guess I could add another page and type the text in that so the graphics are cohesive. You could also edit, you highlight the text in those templates and you could change it here just so it's consistent. Again, I don't recommend adding more than 3 types of text to one design. Claire, yeah, let me allow you to talk and you can talk to me. Okay, Claire, you're allowed to talk. You're on mute.
Hi, Chris, thanks. Yeah, this is really helpful. I'm really learning a lot. Yeah, I was thinking of emails that I received from people who are doing marketing, and it just looks so professional. You know, everything is sort of in the same, say, frame, and the colors all match. Maybe there's an image, and I'd love to be able to produce something like that. And I'm pretty sure they're probably using something like this.
They're using, if they're professional graphic designers, they're probably using maybe something like Adobe InDesign or Photoshop. But like did I say this was Photoshop for Dummies or graphic design for dummies? This is the every man's or every woman's version of Photoshop. This makes it more attainable to the average person.
Yeah, and the people that I'm referring to, they may have hired someone, but they're also small business owners. I guess I just need to play with it and see what I can do. You know, you've kind of given me a good start, and I do have an account, but I think I found it a bit overwhelming. So I think with your introduction followed by taking their some of their, their webinar, Canva webinar 101s and things like that, I think I'll have more confidence and be more efficient about trying to do it.
Yeah, for sure. And I will, this is recorded. I will post it on demand onto our YouTube channel. I know I went kind of fast to fit this all into an hour, but you could review it, and I'll let everybody on the call know when it is available on YouTube and on demand.
That would be great. No, actually, I thought the pace was really good, Chris, and the way that you showed us, and then there was some time to kind of pause. It helps. It's easier to absorb actually when it's like that, in my opinion. So thank you.
No problem. And yeah, definitely you could revisit. I know some of us are less computer savvy than others, so that's why I like to record these things.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for those comments, Claire.
You're welcome. Thank you so much.
Again, if anybody wants to speak, you raise your hand for me. I'll allow you to speak. You're welcome to put your questions or comments into the Q&A. You're welcome to steal my design for an Easter Facebook post if you want, if you'd like to. If you want me to invite you to it, I'd be happy to do that if we chat or Q&A over your email address. Okay, again, everybody who wants to exit is welcome to exit. I have a few more slides, but they're just basically our resource partners. And I'll go over those with you where we left off. Let me make sure I'm sharing the correct slide with you. Okay, so we have other resource partners at the SBDC. We have the Procurement Technical Assistance Center that helps people do business with the government, federal and state entities. If you want to take your product or services across the border, the International Business Accelerator offers counseling and those opportunities. And we have a new member to our SBDC team, the New Mexico Technology Commercialization Accelerator, and they give no-cost counseling related to intellectual property, patents, and trademarks. We have our partners that we are funded by the Small Business Administration in the state of New Mexico, and these are our partners that are funded under the Small Business Administration. We have SCORE, the Service Corps of Retired Executives, WEST, or the Women's Business Center program, and we have the Veterans Business Outreach Center. And then we have the Small Business Development Centers, of course, the Small Business Administration, and the New Mexico Economic Development Department. And Monica, yes, I'm going to send you the recording if you're still on. Okay, I kept you guys 8 minutes longer than I needed to. I'll try to speed it up next time. I will email everybody who attended today when the recording is online, and I will email everybody the PDF copy of my slides. Thank you for spending time with me today, and I hope to see you all soon. I'm going to end the webinar for all.